Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Irma, for allowing me to come and speak to your parents in SAISD. Really gracious of your invitation, and kids coping with COVID is really, really important right now because there's so much happening around our lives, changes, chaos, and the question becomes, how do we adjust to something that is now different and something that doesn't seem to be going back to the way that things used to be. And so we want to be able to have some conversations around that. I'm going to spend some time talking about the stress that our kids might be experiencing. I'll talk a little bit about the changes and the losses that they're experiencing, because I really think that we've experienced some loss in our normal lives. We haven't talked probably enough about that. So I'll talk some about signs and stress. And then we'll talk about building resiliency with your kids. So we'll focus on nurturing an environment, creating a nurturing environment for your children. We'll talk about connection and coping. I'll share a little bit about some strategies that are working for families. We'll share some encouragement, and we'll talk about some additional resources at the end. So let me just go ahead and start here with stress. I'm going to move. There we go. All right. So a little bit about stress. We all have it. It's not new. It's designed to be a lifesaver. So just the right amount of stress for us can be the catalyst that leads us to positive achievements. Without it, we could become too passive. And there is a difference between healthy stress and unhealthy stress, what we would call chronic stress or even toxic stress. And I said earlier that we all experience stress at varying levels. Small children might experience changes in their environment, and you might see them make some changes in their behavior. So when kids are acting out, they're not really acting out and they're not really misbehaving. A lot of times what's happening is that they have a need that has been unmet, or they're experiencing stress and change in their environment. And so they don't have the words that they need to communicate to us what they're feeling. So instead of telling us what they're feeling, they misbehave. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And if you have questions about that at the end, be happy to answer those questions. Some changes and losses that our kids have experienced in the last 6 weeks or just after spring break. There's been a change in routine. Like, our routines have really just gone upside down in our homes. Our schedules are very different. Mom and dad are now working from home. That can be really difficult and it can be really challenging. And let me just say that the first day that I realized I came to work at home and my son was starting school online at like 9 o'clock in the morning, I realized I am now responsible for my son's education, and I'm responsible for a full-time job, like keeping a full-time job. Y'all, that was way too much for me to handle in one day. I couldn't. So I gave my son a free day. I was like, you know what? I can't do that with you. I love you and I want to help you, but I have to focus on making sure that things are good at the office, and I have to learn some things today that will just stretch me beyond my capacity. So my son got a free day, but he did not unlearn how to read. He still knows how to do math. And we were able to reduce in my home a lot of stress that way. So as we go through this presentation, I want you all to think about this. We are all in the same ocean, but we're in different boats. Your boat doesn't look like my boat. And so I want you to make choices for your family based on what you think is best for your family. What is best for my family is not necessarily best for the neighbor's family. So think about that as we go through what I'll be talking about today. I talked a little bit about online schooling. We went from doing face-to-face classes where kids were hanging out with their friends every day. They were eating breakfast at school and lunch at school. And now our kids are doing everything from home. And not only that, but everything is virtual. So when we meet and we talk with grandma and grandpa, we're doing it on Zoom. We talk with our tios and our tias, we're doing it on Zoom. With our friends, everything is on Zoom or online, whatever application you're using. A lot of that has gone virtual. So there's a change in the connections that we're able to make or not make. And that really has the ability to affect our kids and our teenagers. When teenagers are saying to you, I'm really going crazy at home, I haven't been able to talk to any of my friends or been able to connect with any of my friends, know that for teenagers at this point in their life and developmentally, these connections are so valuable and so important. And so if there are ways that you all can come up with in your family to help your kids connect with their friends, I want to encourage you all to help them make those connections. Remember too that our kids don't have the freedom to do the things they used to do before. We as parents don't have the freedom to do the things we used to do before. So we're going to the store, but we have to wear a mask. We're going to gas up. We're not going on day trips to the beach. We've taken some day trips to the beach, and we can't do that. And so we have to be really mindful that all of these changes have been changes that have affected our kids in really, really challenging ways. And so they experience stress as the result of that. So if they're experiencing stress, how can we help them manage that stress in a way that is helpful? And the last thing here is sports. Exercise is so vital to our kids, our young kids, as well as our teenagers. And so they're unable to participate in making those connections. And, let's talk about even the loss of not being able to graduate the way that other classes have graduated in the past. Graduation is going to look really, really different. And so your teenagers might be over dramatic in this sense, but I would say not to confuse that with dramatics. I would say that is a really, really big loss for them. It's something that they've been working their entire lives for, and it's something that they've been looking forward to, and they've worked hard at it. And graduation is a really big deal. So if you can begin to think about how you're going to make those celebrations for graduation for your seniors this year a memorable experience, now is the time to do that. All right, let me move on. I've included some signs of stress because I think it's important for you guys to understand behavior. So it's important to understand behavior developmentally, and it's important to understand behavior from the perspective of children, from the perspective of teens. It's different. It looks different. And so in children, you might see a little bit more irritability or moodiness with them. They might withdraw from activities that they used to enjoy. They might express worries more often than usual. And this might sound more like, Mom, I have a headache. I don't really want to do my work today, but I know I have work to do. Or my stomach hurts. And so that's stress in children. It's not always stress, but the majority of the time, that kind of behavior can lead to stress and even more worrisome behavior. You might find that your children are crying a little bit more often than they had been or ever. And you might find too that they might be a little bit more clingy than they used to be. So they might be displaying fearful reactions. So they're listening to our conversations. They're hearing what we're saying. And children, up until about the age of 9 or 10, are very concrete. They live in the present. They cannot live in the past. They do not live in the future because their mind is not developed in such a way that they understand future consequences and future behavior. So they're very much present oriented. Teenagers are a little bit more different. They understand more. They have a little bit more depth, but that doesn't mean that they have developed in their brain or are developed in their brain as well as an adult is. So some signs of stress that you might see in teenagers, and there's more than these. I only mentioned a few, but there are more. And if you have questions, we can talk a little bit more after the presentation. But these were some of the more significant ones that I thought, if you see these in your teenagers, you might consider having more conversations with them or seeking help, but significantly avoiding parents, abandoning longtime friendships and creating new ones that aren't necessarily healthy friendships, and expressing excessive hostility toward family members. And so, again, I want you to think about, were my kids doing these things prior to COVID-19? And the biggest thing is the change in behavior in children. So if there's no change in behavior, they're pretty much going along, they're getting their stuff done, they're generally doing pretty well and they're adapting. But if you see some of these things in your children, that might be cause for a little bit more concern, and you should be having conversations with your kiddos. All right, I'm gonna move on. So the question becomes, as parents, what can we do? And so I want you all to consider what resiliency is. When we are parenting, I always encourage parents to think about parenting with the end in mind. When my kids leave my house one day, what kind of people do I want them to be? And so if I'm thinking about that ahead of time, then I'm going to work at creating an environment at home that helps them to become those people in my house. Our house is the training field. I couldn't go out and run a marathon, 26.2 miles, if I didn't train ahead for the marathon, right? We can't go out and be adults if we don't train ahead to be adults and to act like adults. So how are we helping our kids do that? And these next 3 points, nurturing and connection and coping, will help you guys understand a little bit more about how to develop that in your children. Our home is the training field for them. And so it's important to let our kids make mistakes at home. If they're making mistakes in our home, then we're there to help them move beyond making those mistakes and figuring out how to make it better. So I want you to think of your home environment as that place. And so if we're talking about nurturing, something that I've read a lot about in books is listening. The art of listening is so very, very important. And your kids can tell if you're not listening. They absolutely can. And they will call you out on it. I know that because my kid has called me out. And I asked him once, I'm like, how do you know that I'm not listening? And his response was, well, you're just saying, And I was like, dang, you really know that I wasn't. And he was right. I really wasn't listening. And so my job at that point was to, one, validate the fact that he was right. He wasn't wrong. He was right. Two, how do I make that better? How do I fix that? Because I want to show him that I respect him. And if I just blow him off, or if I say, it's not really a big deal, then the message that he gets is that he's not important. And that's not true, because we want our children to know that they are important. And so in listening to them, something that you can do with them is maintain eye contact with them. How do we know when our kids want to talk? I could be washing the dishes, and if my son peeks around the corner and he says, hey, Mom, can I talk to you about something that happened today at school? I immediately drop the dishes, because the dishes are really not as important as my 8-year-old coming into the kitchen and saying, can I talk to you about something that happened at school today? What 8-year-old does that, right? And so if they're coming to you and they're asking you, I really need to talk with you about this, is because it's really important. So giving our kids our undivided attention is important. And then reflecting what they've said to you. And reflecting would look like, what you're saying is that you had a really hard time with one of the teachers at school today, and you had to sit by yourself to think about what happened. Is that what you said? And so your child will either tell you, no, that's not what I'm saying, or they'll say, yes, that is exactly what happened today. And so that's how you can encourage a nurturing environment in your kids, by listening and reflecting what they're saying to you. It's important to consider their age and their development and use appropriate language. You're not going to use the same language with teenagers as you would with children that are really young, like first and second grade. So teenagers actually prefer to have face-to-face conversations. And sometimes they prefer not to talk about themselves as much as they will talk about their friends, and they'll say, hey, mom, this is what happened to my friend the other day. And sometimes what they're really referring to is, if I did that, if I did what my friend did, how would you respond, mom? So they tend to talk about their situations in the third person. So engaging your children in talking with you in that conversation might look like, well, what do you think his parents would say about what he did? Or what do you think his friends would say about the choice that he made? And then you could ask them, what if you were in that situation, what would you do? And so that is a way to get your teenagers to engage in conversation with you when normally they might not. Something that is really, really important is limiting the media exposure that our kids get. And not just the media exposure, but even the adult conversations that we're having around our kids. When I was a kid, I would listen to my mom's conversations with her friends. I did. I was being a busybody. I was nosy. I wanted to know what they were talking about. So I'd hang out outside the door. That's true. That's what I did. And some of our kids might do the same thing. And some of our kids might just be in the same room with us, but could hear us talking in the living room about whatever is happening in the world or with the neighbor down the street. And then they come back and they tell you what they heard. So we have to really be careful about what we say around our kids because they're listening. One way to offer a nurturing environment is to offer comfort and a distraction to our kids. So I'll talk about a situation that happened with my son a couple of weeks ago, where he came into my office at home and he said, Mom, I'm in a bit of a pickle. Those are my words, not his. He actually said, I think I'm kind of in trouble with something. And I said, whoa, okay. So I turned my chair around, and there's a small chair in my office, and he sits in that small chair. And he said, I haven't done all my work for the week, and I'm behind, and I'm going to be late turning in some stuff. And I could tell that he was really overwhelmed. The way that I could tell that he was overwhelmed was that he was putting his hands up here and he was just rubbing his head like this. I could tell he was stressed. So the distraction that I offered him on that day was, look, I can tell that you're stressed out, that you're overwhelmed. Let's take a break. I'm in a good place right now. We can take a break. Let's go run an errand and we can pick up lunch. And on the way back home, if you want to, we can talk about it. And sure enough, that's what happened. On the way back home, as he was processing the choices that he made, at the end of that, he said, I did this to myself. I put myself in this situation. And so my question to him was, if you've put yourself in this situation, how can you fix it? Because you know you can fix it. What are you willing to do? And so then we started talking through finding a solution for his problem. And what I did was I allowed him to come up with his own solutions. And as long as they were valid solutions that he could come up with on his own that he could do, we did. And what he did was, I'm gonna talk to my teacher. I'm gonna tell my teacher I don't have all my work. And then I'm gonna work on my work this weekend. I'll do some work on Saturday and I'll do some work on Sunday. And I said, okay, that sounds like a good plan. And so when we came home, I helped him engage that plan. So I walked him through a situation that he probably wouldn't have been able to do on his own. But with our help, our kids will be able to do the same thing And so when you get into a situation like that, or your kids get into a situation like that, my suggestion is to do these things, to listen and to reflect, and to allow them to come up with their own solutions for their problems. Also, maintaining a structure and a routine is really, really important, hands down. Structure and routine helps kids thrive, but build in for flexibility. Their school schedule right now is not going to look the same way as their school schedule did when they were actually in school. And what I did here at home was I let my son um, decide what he was going to do. So from 10 to 12, his job is to do work, schoolwork. And then he gets to decide whether he wants to do science or reading or whatever other subject. Then he takes a break at noon. You get to do whatever you want at noon. And then again, from 1 to 3, he's doing schoolwork again. And so he gets to choose what he's doing within that time. What I've allowed him to have is choice. Kids need to have some autonomy over the work that they're doing and how they're spending their time, because that teaches them time management. Plus, it also gives them choice, and it gives them back some of the power that has been taken away because of the limits of where we're at right now and what we're doing. Okay, I'm going to move on to connection. Connection is really, really important. And I talked quite a bit about listening. How do we know when our children want to talk? We want to be able to make ourselves available to our kids when we know they need to talk. My son will come into this office, frequently visit with me. And then when I can take breaks, I turn my chair around and we have a conversation, and I'm making eye contact with him and I'm reflecting back what he's saying to me. Quantity time versus quality time is also really important. You could spend a lot of time in the same room with somebody and not spend quality time together. And quality time for kids will look very different than it would look for teenagers. So let your kids choose what they want to spend their time doing with you when you spend quality time with them. Give them that option. My son loves to watch superhero movies. So during our time together, that's what we do. When we first started doing this, what he wanted me to do was watch Pokemon with him. I couldn't do that show because of the voices in that show, right? But I'm like, oh, I really want to spend quality time with you. So I'm going to do what you want to do instead of something I want to do. So I sat there with him, we compromised, and I sat there with him and I watched that show. But the very next time we spent time together, we agreed that it would be helpful for us to pick something that we both wanted to watch together. And I could really do the superhero stuff a lot better than the Pokemon stuff. So that's what we do. We have taken our chairs outside in the evenings, sometimes in the cool of the night, and just looked at the stars. That's quality time together. And the first time we did that in the last month, my son came in and he said, that was really nice. I really liked doing that. We should do that again tomorrow. Note to self, I need to be able to make time for that tomorrow because that's what he's saying he really wants to do. So make yourselves available and think about what quantity time versus quality time looks like to your kids. Let them pick out the activity that they want to do. Also, family rituals are really important during this time. They're important all of the time, but even more so now. So if you had some family rituals prior to COVID-19 that you were doing that you can't do now, maybe now is the time to build some new family rituals. One thing that we're continuing to do at home is eating family meals together. We turn off the TV, and turning off the TV really forces us to focus on each other at home. And so my son has gotten in the habit of asking, how was your day today? Mom, how was your day today, Dad? And we talk about that. Fun and games. When we were kids, I remember playing a game with my sister. It was me and my sister at home and my parents. And we found a stick and we found a can of peas and we played baseball with a stick and a can of peas. It was so much fun because it was really hard to hit that can of peas with a stick. But we didn't have a baseball and we didn't have a ball. And so we just did what we could with what we had. And so now I have that memory that I can share. And so when you're thinking about strengthening family ties, consider making memories with your kids. What are the things that you want your kids to talk about when they are raising their kids one day? What kind of memories do you want them to have? And think about that. And then nurture that environment at home with them. Those are the things we want to hear our kids talking about when they leave our house one day. And the last thing on connection is widening the circle with relatives and neighbors. This is going to be a little bit more difficult right now because we're on lockdown, right? Things are changing. They're a little bit different. We're having to wear masks. But we know that the neighbor down the street hasn't been really leaving their house. And so if it's generally safe to let your kids hang out with other kids in the neighborhood, and you feel like that's okay for your family to do, then I would encourage that. Community connections are really important. Really, really emphasize what the school is doing for kids right now that's really important, and what maybe the church is doing for your kids. So sometimes, and in some circles, it's safe enough for teenagers to go do service projects like handing out plates of food at the food bank. Kids do really well. Teenagers do much better when they have a sense of purpose in their life and they have a sense of connection, like they have served someone. And so if there are community events and if your church is doing a service project, I would encourage you to bring your kids out to do that. Because at the end of the day, the focus has been taken off of ourselves and we've put it on somebody else. There's a secondary benefit to being able to help other people that you can't get from doing anything else. And that really serves to bring purpose to our lives. It also serves to bring hope to other people. So that's really important in terms of connection. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about coping. The few things I want to talk about here is one, getting a grip on stress. So there's a method that I learned about recently that I thought was really, really helpful. And the method, the acronym for this FEEL method, this method is called FEEL. And so the first step in this process is to freeze. When we're talking about stress and when we're dealing with stressful situations at home, stop and take a deep breath together. When we take deep breaths together, it helps us to calm down. You can feel the tension in our muscles release and leave our bodies. The other thing that happens when we're doing breathing is that we can think more rationally. When we're really stressed, our blood pressure is up, our heart rate is up, we're really frustrated. And when we're really frustrated, we can't really think rationally. Our kids don't know that. They haven't begun to understand that yet. And so our job as parents is to help them calm down the environment. The next thing that you can do is empathize. And empathy is feeling the other person's emotions. Like when my son was overwhelmed, I could tell he was overwhelmed. I could sense that. It's the energy in the room. And I felt really bad for him. I'm like, oh, you've gotten yourself into a pickle. Now you have to figure out how to get out of it. And my job was to help him. So I told him, I can see that you're really frustrated. I've been where you're at. With my work environment changing, I understand how that feels. And so then when he was calm enough to evaluate what was happening, we together helped him find a solution. And so it's really important to encourage your kids to come up with their own solution. They are going to be more successful at following through if they come up with a solution on their own. And this is where you can help manage that. Sometimes they may at some point say or come up with a solution that's not really helpful, and you know that. And so in situations like that, you might suggest an alternate solution that you know is manageable and something that they can do. And the last thing in this method is letting go. The truth is that some of our problems really don't have a solution right away. They just don't. And there are some things that we just have to decide to let go. Like at our house, it's getting all of the laundry done and put away in the drawers. Like we can't get it done. So we've decided to live out of the laundry baskets for a little while. That's okay. It's letting go of perfectionism and allowing ourselves in our house to do what's best for us. So the next thing I want you guys to think about is taking action. And this is about getting into the right mindset. And so asking yourself, how big or small is the problem that we're dealing with right now? If the problem is, Mom, I don't have any clean clothes for tomorrow, that's something that needs to be taken care of today, right? If the problem is that that I haven't done all my schoolwork and I might get in trouble if I don't turn in all my schoolwork, then this is something that we need to work through together and help you figure out how to get it done. And then there are small problems like my sister is taking away all my toys. Those are small problems. And so we want our kids to be able to figure out together, how are you guys going to share those toys? I need for you guys to figure out that on your own, problem solve on your own. And if they're still yelling and screaming in the background and you can't concentrate, then that might be an indication that you should step in and help them manage that problem. But it's okay to help our kids learn to manage some of the small problems on their own. That's giving them tools for tomorrow. And then the other question that I would encourage you to ask yourself is, in tomorrow, is this going to be important? In some situations, yes, it will be. In 10 years, is this really going to matter? Is this problem really going to matter? And if the answer is no, then the chances of this being a big problem is probably really slim. So you have to get yourself into the right mindset. And teaching your kids how to get into that mindset in terms of problems is going to be really important. It's also going to be really important to be able to do that consistently with your kids. When they do things consistently, they begin to become competent at doing some of these skills. And so if you can build in some consistency with helping them get into the right mindset, you're giving them a tool for tomorrow. All right, moving on. Two more forms of coping that are really important is taking care of your body. Sometimes this is the last thing that we think about, but it's really, really important to take care of your body. So exercising is one of those ways to do that. It might be really difficult right now to go to the gym. Some people aren't going to the gym. We're not, because the gyms are closed, right? So what is an alternative thing to do? And some of the things that we've done here, I love to jog, but I've gained a lot of weight, so I can't do that anymore. But what I decided I could do was walk. That's an alternative for me. And so at the end of my day, most days of the week, I'm getting dressed. Like I shut down my computer, I get dressed, and I go for a walk. Since then, my husband has joined me on walks, which is really good because we get to spend time together. Sometimes we talk, sometimes we don't. But what we're doing is we're demonstrating healthy coping behavior for our son, right? And the other thing that I've done with him when the weather was a lot lighter and not so hot is that we would, during our lunchtime, I'd say, get your walking shoes on. We're going for a walk. On some days I gave him the option to do it. And then there were days where I'm like, not an option. You have to go. We have to walk, because exercise for kids is really important. That's one really good way for younger children to get rid of stress. So all of this emotion that they have happening in their bodies, they can't really do anything with. Getting them outside to go play a game, to go play chase, have a water balloon fight. At our house, my son has a Nerf gun and my husband has a Nerf gun, and from time to time, fights break out in our house. And there are Nerf wars in our house. And so the only guideline or restriction to that is don't break my stuff. But outside of that, it's something that they do for fun and as a distraction that's really helpful. Sometimes they go outside, sometimes they do it in the house. Um, but it's fun. And so, again, my son will have that memory one day. He'll be able to talk about, yeah, when we were in lockdown, there were a lot of things we did we probably shouldn't have done in the house, but that was fun. And those are the memories I want him to have. Taking care of your emotions is a really big one, really important for teenagers, really important for kids. And so some ways to be able to do that is through art and creativity. Not all kids are artsy. Not all kids like it. But having some of this stuff out, create a little basket with colors and put paper out for your kids, put markers out for them, turn off the TV and just give them an opportunity to choose. You can go read a book, you can draw, there's things at home, activities that you can do with them. There are a lot of things on Pinterest that you can get ideas from to be creative at home. Journaling is also really helpful for teenagers. They might initially not like it, but they might find too that after they start doing it, it's really good way to externalize what you're feeling inside. So putting it on paper is externalizing it. And you can even encourage your kids to do that. In counseling, we do this with our kids. You can write something in here. And if you don't want anybody to see it, you can just stick it in the shredder afterwards, and then nobody ever has to see that. But they're externalizing whatever they're feeling in here. I've put down laughing, crying in here, and hobbies. Crying, believe it or not, as adults, is really, really helpful. Sometimes kids just need to cry, and it's okay to let them cry. I want to encourage you to comfort your kids when they're crying. The message that I received when I was growing up at home was that it was not okay to cry. And as an adult, I've learned that that's one way to get rid of stress. It's one way to release tension in our bodies. And there's really nothing wrong with crying. It's helpful. We were created with the ability to be able to shed tears for a reason, right? So allowing your kids to cry, sometimes holding them brings them comfort. So allow them to do that. And the other thing that I would encourage is to get your kids to pick up a hobby. My son loves to build Legos at home. Legos are really expensive, so we don't buy a lot of Legos. And sometimes he destroys the ones that he makes to make new ones. That's where the creativity comes in with him. And so I encourage him to do that. He has some that he's got up on a shelf that he keeps, but then he's got a whole bunch. And so if he hasn't touched those in a while, this is quiet time. This is no TV time. This is no tablet time. And so you get an opportunity to choose whatever you want to do during this time. Downtime like this is very good for kids. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about some strategies that might work for your family. The first of these is to let go of perfectionism. The situation that we're in right now is not normal for any of us. We're having to work from home. We're having to do school from home. And so probably the most important thing is there are some things that we just need to let go of. And so we want to remember and we want to give our kids grace during this time. That turning in perfect work isn't as important as getting the work done. Break up assignments into manageable chunks. My son's a fifth grader, right? So he can do 1 to 2 hours of work, but even in the 1 to 2 hours of work, he gets a break. He gets to get up, he gets to walk around. And sometimes he'll turn on his tablet and watch a show and go back to what he was doing. I've given him that freedom because I want him to be able to go for the long haul. If they don't have that freedom to be able to break up their assignments like that, it's going to get more stressful. Not worth it for our families, not worth it for our kids. Schedule in breaks. A good thing to do during this time is to set up alarms on your phone. So every hour on the hour, you can set up a 10-minute break where that alarm goes off and you guys are getting up and you're doing something together. You're going to the kitchen, you're having a little conversation in the kitchen, and then you go back to doing what you were doing during the before your break. You can go outside, you can go for a walk, play chase with your kids. When was the last time you played chase with your kids, right? That's good for us as adults too. And let them do their work with a buddy through video chats. They're already online. And sometimes it's helpful to be able to do the work together because the load doesn't seem as heavy. Plus, it's another way for kids to connect during the day with their friends, where before they were able to do that at work and they would do work in centers with their friends. Now they don't get to do that. So if they have video chats, encourage them to do their work with a buddy. That's really helpful. Help your kids go from what if to what is. In other words, focus on the present. We can't do anything about what if. That's out of our control. And so helping your kids focus on what is right now, like what can you do today? What can you do this very moment that can help you move toward the next assignment that you have to do? Well, I have to finish this assignment first, then I can do the other one. And if that's all you can do for today, then that's good enough. That is okay. And then finally, schedule some fun every day. If you can schedule something fun every day, schedule something fun every day. Could be cooking together. I'm teaching my son right now to make eggs because that's the easiest thing to do. And he watches me make mac and cheese. And so he goes through the steps of making mac and cheese. He's a 5th grader, so it's time for him to learn stuff like that. He doesn't always do that with me, but there are times when he's in the kitchen and we're having conversations and I'm cooking and he's talking and we're having a conversation together. So those are other ways to engage with your kids. And so I want to share some encouragement for your journey. I attended a presentation by Dr. Carla Hagen, who is an assistant professor in the College of Education. And these are some things that some of the teachers that she interviewed for her presentation said. Working full-time and teaching your kids is hard. It's okay to admit that for ourselves. We're not going to do it perfectly. Encourage the stretch. Struggle is an important part of the learning process. Embrace it. Trust, grit, positive coping skills, and emotional bonding are much more important to me than some of the skills they were needing to learn during this time. Another teacher said, don't stress about the small things. Making sure your child turns in picture perfect work every time. Grace is really the theme of this quarantine. Offer your kids some grace. It's not going to be perfect, but did they get it done? Yes, they got it done. Did you do your best? Did my best. All right, then, we're good. Take a breath and take care of yourselves. Kids are resilient. If we as parents are taking care of ourselves, then we could be good for our kids. If we're not taking care of ourselves and if we're not managing our stress, our kids are going to follow our lead. And they're going to have a difficult time managing stress. So it's important that you as a parent are taking care of yourself too. I wanted to share this Chinese proverb with you because I thought it was really important in terms of thinking about resiliency. And resiliency is the ability to be able to bounce back after challenging times. And so this Chinese proverb says, the other side of crisis is opportunity. When your kids are done with this, and even if we're not, I think that they will have learned a lot of things about themselves that they wouldn't have learned in a different situation. And so this isn't necessarily bad. I think it's actually a good thing because they're being challenged to grow and to move outside of themselves. Another teacher said this to her kids. She wants her kids to know this. If I could say anything to a parent right now, it would be not to worry about the little things when it comes to assignments. I would want them to know that more than I want everything in Google Classroom to be pretty and complete, I want their child to be happy and learning. Read books, cook together, have conversations. That kind of learning is so lasting and important. It's okay not to have this whole online learning situation completely under control. So there you go. She's giving you permission not to be perfect. And so these are some additional resources for you if you're looking for more resources on parenting. We often offer these in our counseling office for parents to read. I really, really like Dr. Gary Chapman's The Love Languages for Kids. That's a really good one. Boundaries for Kids and Boundaries for Teens are also really good. And then Grace-Based Parenting. This brings us to the end of our presentation today. I went over, so if you have questions, now would be a good time. Our contact information is on here in case you're wondering or you find yourself in a place where you might want more help with parenting or help for your children or family.
Thank you, Doceli. Because we are a small group, I think if you have a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and then you can ask the question.
Hi, I had a question.
Mm-hmm.
So my son, I have to go to work on Monday, so I'm going back. I had been out this whole time, and I told my oldest child, who's also in 5th grade, and he started crying, and he was like, oh my gosh, I don't want you to get sick. I don't want to get sick, and all these emotions came out from him. So I didn't know, like, what is a good way to talk to him, and then my younger son, who, about that.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And there is fear around going back to work. A lot of parents are going back to work. But I think that the best way to handle that situation is to nurture your kids and let them talk to you about what they're scared of, what scares them the most. If he's scared that you will get sick, I think it's important for you to comfort him and tell him that if you get sick, there are doctors that can help you get better. Because that's true. And there are people that are getting better from COVID-19. That's true. Offer your kids information that is true, that you've seen. More people are recovering from COVID-19. And so if they get sick, you can tell them that there are doctors that can help you help him get better. It's like having the flu, right? We've had the flu in the past. We've gotten sick. We've gotten fevers. And so the doctors are finding ways to help people get better. Keep talking with them and keep the conversations going with them. Ask them questions at the end of the day when you come home from work about how their day was. Tell them about how your day was. They need to know that. You might not share all of the details about your day with them, but you could share some of the good moments you've had, some of the bad moments you had, how you dealt with those bad moments, because again, you're trying to teach your kids how to cope with really hard situations, and they will take your cue from you.